When you play the Game of Thrones, you
Subscribe and like.
or you die. There is no middle ground.
Welcome back to the Grease Comedy YouTube channel. Today's video, we are going to be doing Arya 2, A Clash of Kings. Something I want to point out right away. It's quite interesting that we're already getting a second Arya chapter, given the fact that we haven't had a Daenerys chapter yet, we haven't had a Catelyn chapter yet, we haven't had a Jon chapter yet. George is very clear, in my opinion, of setting the tone for this book. Arya is going to be a very dominant POV throughout not only this book, but the next book. And that's very interesting to note, just given the fact that if you look at book 1, if you look at Arya, she was one of the POVs that got the least amount of chapters. So I find it very interesting that George decides to kind of shift to giving her more of a dominant role. But not waste any time. Let's get into Arya 2, A Clash of Kings. Also, if you did want to listen on Spotify, the link is down in the description. I do want to shout out those people that listen on there. And let's get into page 61. Arya and her group traveled from dawn to dusk through a variety of landscapes, woods, orchards, fields, villages, market towns, and holdfasts. But at night they made camp and ate by the light of the red sword, or the comet, is kind of being referred to, right? They've kind of just named it the red sword at this point. Arya was noticing the increasing number of camps and more traffic on the King's Road with each passing night. And the one thing that becomes very apparent for Arya is that they seem to be the only ones going north. Most of the people here are going south. They're fleeing to King's Landing or trying to get out of the war, as the war is coming to the Riverlands and, just places north of the capital. And so they're kind of encountering, old people, children, big and small, barefoot girls, and women with babies. And they traveled and they saw lots of different ways of traveling with farm wagons, ox carts, draft horses, ponies, mules, donkeys. It's just all of these people migrating south is really what Arya is seeing. Some travelers carried their goods on foot, while others pushed wheelbarrows with a smith carrying his tools, and another man pushing 2 babies in a blanket. Most people were headed south towards King's Landing, unlike Arya's group traveling north, and few spoke to them. A lot of these people would be very, very, very wary of strangers. As you look at the Riverlands, all these, new people coming into the area, there's not only is there, the Westermen coming in and kind of sacking the Riverlands, but there's also going to be people that are going to become bandits. You're going to have, for instance, the Brotherhood Without Banners, who are going to be seen as outlaws. There's going to be a bunch of individual different types of raiders going on that you're not really going to want to talk to strangers. You're having to leave your homes to flee the war. And even Arya notes that a lot of these travelers were not unarmed, right? These were people that were armed to try and protect themselves and their loved ones with daggers, dirks, scythes, axes, makeshift clubs, and staffs. And even some of the travelers that Arya and her group pass, they seem to be eyeing their wagons warily. A lot of these people would not have much supplies being pushed south, and they might have been thinking, hey, maybe we can rob these people. But fortunately for Arya, they were in a group of about 30, far too large for any just random, peasants or maybe robbers to try and steal from them. They were just too large of a group at this time. But that gets us into page 62. But it's also interesting to note that George already foreshadows to us that this is a large party that Arya is with. So the fact when we get later on, when the gold cloaks arrive, that same idea is going to be present with the gold cloaks and how they evaluate Yoren and their position, with how other people that are trying to maybe rob them also are looking at their position. That gets us into page 62. But Arya remembers Sirio's advice. Look with your eyes, listen with your ears. More or less just look at the bigger picture, right? And that's made even more clear when Arya sees a mad woman screaming at them from the roadside, warning them that they would be killed. And it's interesting that she's made a mad woman, but it's probably just a woman that has gone through a lot, probably watched loved ones die, she pushed from her home, and for people to be going north when you're realizing this war is going on, really the woman might just be a regular woman, and the people that she's viewing in Arya's party, they might be the mad ones going openly into this. If we think about what is actually going to occur with this party with Yoren and Arya, the woman actually is quite right. But the next day, a merchant offered to buy Yoren's wagons and goods for a fraction of their worth, warning that they be taken in war, but Yoren refused. And the merchant is quite right. You're taking so much supplies, wagons worth and 30 men, It's not going to be enough to defend that when you have, raiding parties from Tywin, whether that be with, Gregor or whatever. And Arya, very shortly after, saw her first grave that day, a small mound for a child. Lami wanted to take a crystal from it, but the bull, aka Gendry, told him to leave it alone. Again, you see a number of things. One, how desperate people like Lami are to join the Night's Watch. They would take something off of a grave. But you think about what the country is going to be brought into, a civil war. This is going to be very normal for people to steal from graves and things like that because people are desperate. And that's something that will only get more magnified, I would really say, for Arya in the next book. But this would not be the last grave that they saw. They would pass more graves freshly dug as they traveled. Soon graves became a daily sight. And it's even crazier, you're having the deaths of the innocent people, right? These aren't soldiers. These aren't, people that are fighting in the war. It's just your common peasants. And they are the ones being damaged by this war. One night, Arya woke feeling uneasy. The night seemed too quiet, and she missed Parade's usual coughing, one of the men that was with their party. And Arya felt uneasy by, Parade not coughing, and she realizes by the morning he would be dead, which he is. And the group buried him and divided his belongings. So think about what I just talked about, right? How people are willing to rob the graves of, like, say, a young child, right, for a crystal or whatever. Even now, right, somebody that they had been traveling with, they strip Parade before they even bury him. They take all of his belongings and give it to other people. And you might be thinking, well, those supplies are better used on, people that actually use them. He's not going to need them now that he's dead. So it's kind of those weird things where it's like, morally, is it good that you're taking things off a dead person? Probably not. But at the same time, pragmatically, it's survival, right? So if you think about Arya and the way she deals with stealing in book 1, kind of the same thing is here. But Yoren had gave Parade's long sword to Gendry, believing he could learn to use it. And that makes sense. Gendry's a pretty built dude, and it makes a lot of sense. A boy named Tarber tossed acorns on Parade's grave, hoping an oak tree would grow to mark his resting place. But that evening they stopped at a village inn. Yoren decided they could afford a hot meal, but they still planned to sleep outside. Still shows, again, trying to find like rooms for 30 men. It's just not something that Yoren's going to be able to afford, but at least they get some food and be able to at least bathe themselves. And Arya was not going to be one of those people, right? She's a girl. She can't be seen as stripping down in front of men because then obviously they will know she's a girl. So she can't do that, which is really unfortunate because that means she's just not going to be able to have any type of, she's not going to be able to clean herself for a very long time if she expects to never, bathe or whatnot until she gets to Winterfell. Now, the unfortunate part of that is that that's kind of a reality for a lot of people in this world, is that trying to clean yourself is something that is not the easiest thing to do. But Tarber, Hot Pie, and Gendry joined the men in the bathhouse, while others stayed outside or crowded into the common room. Yoren sent Lami with the tankards for the 3 prisoners still chained in the back of the wagon. That gets us into page 63. But Arya and some of the group that wasn't washing at this time went to go see the innkeeper as he gave them some hot pork pies, baked apples, some beer on the house, and they kind of talk about some of the things going on in the world right now. And it seems like one of the men who had been at this inn before, he had been caught basically stealing pepper and how he'd been sent to the wall. But again, just shows like how stealing is really an interesting moral conundrum in this world. Like, because of how many people are in, basically poverty and are not able to even have nice food just in general, you see how many people that have to actually steal for those things and give into those temptations. Think about a lot of the people, with that Jon is with in book 1. Some of it is around stealing and things like that. But Arya herself having this cup of beer, she remembers her sister Sansa and how Sansa had never liked the taste of beer and always preferred wine. And wine is, a drink that even still today, wine is more associated as a feminine drink than it is like a men drink. We still have this thing till today, right? That men drink beer, women drink wine. I, as someone, think it's stupid. Wine is so much better than beer. You you cannot convince me that you actually like the taste of beer. And Arya even thinks about this, right? Like Arya kind of contemplates like why people like beer, even though like Arya herself never minds beer. But it is something like worth questioning. It's like beer is such a weird thing to me because it has literally no taste at all. Like it just tastes like water. And I've never understood why people like beer. I don't know if it's just social norm that, you have to drink beer to be a man or whatever. It's stupid, but I'm just saying wine's better. I am a Cersei type of person. I like my wine, that's all I'll say. But either way, this makes her sad thinking of Sansa and her father Ned, who would only ever, allow them to have a little bit of alcohol, not a lot. And so that's why kind of Arya thinks of that. But again, their party is kind of met with a little bit of scorn as Yoren tells them, they're going north of the wall. A lot of these people in the end think, how are you going to do that, right? There's a war going on. You'll never make it. And that they'll be back down south soon enough. Again, people are telling, Yoren that half the fields are burnt and whatever people are left are the people that can find some sort of walls to protect them from the outside. So holdfasts and castles. You think about Edmure as somebody that takes in a lot of, the poor people or the people seeking salvation. That'll happen literally in this book. It just comes very apparent. Like, what do you do if you're somebody that, you're living on a farm? What do? You have no protection outside of what your lord should be doing in defending you. There's nothing you can do. You have to pack up everything and try to go somewhere safe. But Yoren tries to counter this saying that, it doesn't matter, right? We don't take any part of these wars going on, right? The Tully or Lannister, it makes no matter. The Watch is not part of either side. But again, this is kind of put to the test with the Innkeeper. But also Arya says or thinks about before we get to this point is that she thinks about Lord Tully being her grandfather. It did matter to her, but she kind of chews her lip. She doesn't say anything yet. She just kept listening. And the Innkeeper goes on to say it's not really, the Tullys. It's more the Lannisters, but there's also, wild men coming down from the mountains of the moon. A nice little thing that Tyrion set in motion. And he even says, like, what are you going to do if you run into some of these wild men, right? They're not going to care. They're going to kill you and take your stuff regardless. And that's kind of the point. And then, to Arya's interest, the Innkeep says the Starks are in it too, as the young lord has come down south. And Arya questions this. Does he mean Robb? Right? Arya has no knowledge. Remember, information would not have trickled down to Arya, so she doesn't really know what's going on in the world. So any idea of like Robb going to war, coming south, would be really interesting to her. A yellowed-haired man with a tankard in his hand says that he heard the boy rides to battle on a wolf. And Yoren spouts, that's just fool's talk. And we know that that's not the case, right? Robb doesn't actually ride a wolf into a battle, but the wolf is there with him in the battle. So it's kind of like, again, you get some of the truth, but not really all of it. The man even says that the wolf was as big as a horse, he swears. The Innkeep suggests that doesn't mean really anything, right? Swearing doesn't make it true. And he makes a jest at the man, but at this, it does bring up another interesting point that's made, especially towards Arya. Another man in a travel-stained green cloak says it's been a bad year for wolves, as there's been a bunch of wolves in this big pack around the God's Eye, and they've been growing bolder than anyone can remember. Sheep, cows, dogs, it makes no matter. They kill as they like, and they've got no fear of men. It's worth your life to go into those woods by night. This is very interesting behavior from wolves, right? Because wolves do seem to be somewhat fearful depending on what the situation is, but these wolves seem to have no fear. They go wherever. And, they're going to talk about it a little bit more when we get into the next page, in page 64. But it seems to be that there is some sort of greater wolf or she-wolf at the lead of this pack, which is definitely going to spur some interest from Arya herself. But that gets us into page 64. An old woman shared rumors of a great wolf pack led by a fearsome she-wolf, a bitch from the seventh hell, which is more than likely, like 99%, this is Nymeria, and Arya even herself questions that, right? She wonders if this could be her direwolf, the direwolf she had released near the Trident to protect her from being killed by biting Joffrey. And it did make sense, right, that if you think about these wolves, the way they would choose a leader or how they would interact, who is going to be the alpha, well, you have a direwolf, a wolf that's going to be bigger than any of these regular wolves, probably even smarter than any of these regular wolves. Of course, that makes sense that Nymeria would be at the head of this pack. And also, if you think about it, the area that this wolf pack is sprouting up, very close to where Arya, and Nymeria departed. And Arya has to recall another painful memory as she thinks about how difficult it had been to force Nymeria to leave and abandon her, how they had thrown stones until she ran off, and wondered if her direwolf would still recognize or hate her now, which is a very interesting question. Would Nymeria realize why that she and Arya had to depart from each other? But the man in a green cloak shares another story about the she-wolf attacking a village and snatching a baby, and how Lord Mooten and his sons failed to capture her after tracking her with wolfhounds. And Arya can't stay silent anymore because it seems like they're talking about Nymeria. And Arya says that the wolves won't eat babies, which is kind of interesting. Like, yes, Nymeria would never eat a baby at Arya's command, but wolves eat humans and corpses and little babies probably all the time if allowed to do so. So unfortunately, I think Arya's kind of wrong. And Yoren even tells, Arya that she's green sick on beer, just trying to like discount her, take any attention away from Arya. Again, Arya's supposed to be going very incognito, not drawing a lot of attention to herself. And Yoren then sends Arya outside, ordering her to stay quiet and check on the horses, pushing her out angrily. And Arya, very frustrated by this because she didn't like the slander, of Nymeria. She then gets tossed outside because she said the wrong thing. She runs into the prisoners that are being held. And the youngest with red and white hair called out to Arya, asking for another taste of beer. We know this to be Jack and Hagar, but Arya, not yet. He hinted that Arya could help him, mentioning that a man could use a bath, and that a boy could make a friend, trying to charm her while imprisoned. It's just one of those things where it's like, yeah, obviously these people are not in great living conditions, and they're just wanting some things. Now, not to say they don't deserve it, especially, Biter and Rarge that are, in there as well. But this is quite interesting, as it is our first real meeting of Jaqen and Arya, which gets us into page 65. Arya told the prisoners she had friends, but Rarge disagrees, taunting her by saying she had none, and there were no one nearby either. Rarge was thick and hairy, reminding Arya of an ape from a book she had seen. His missing nose made him hard to look at. But even worse, maybe, was the bald prisoner, Biter, as he hissed at Arya, revealing a stump where his tongue should be. When Arya flinched, he wagged his tongue, mocking at her. This is not the greatest first impression if you're trying to get things from Arya. It kind of tells you these guys aren't very bright. Like, if you think about this and you're, in a cage or whatever, and you have no access to getting things on your own, you think you would want to make nice with people that could give you those things, like Jaqen, but they're not great. And Jaqen even says this, right? He apologizes for his rude companions, explaining that he did not choose to be with them, which, in my opinion, might be to the contrary. It seems like Jaqen was exactly where he wanted to be, based upon we find him, being at the black cells and all of that. Jaqen then introduced himself and his fellow prisoners, Rarge and Biter. He explained that Biter couldn't speak or write, but his sharp teeth earned him the name. Arya was not exactly charmed or thrilled by them. I guarantee if anyone was in that position, they also would not have been charmed by them. But Arya thinks they couldn't hurt her since they were chained up. But that isn't going to stop her from doing something I think is quite stupid, but shows, I guess, her bravery. Jaqen lamented by turning his empty tankard upside down, while Rarge threw his cup at Arya, cursing, but missed due to his shackles, and Arya is able to actually also just jump out of the way as well. Rarge demanded Arya bring them beer, threatening her crudely. Again, if you want things, don't do it this way. I'm just saying, you treat people like crap, they are not going to then give you things. Obviously. Arya, recalling Sirio's lessons, drew her wooden practice sword and forced herself to approach the wagon, despite her fear. This is just very interesting from Arya. It seems like maybe this is just her pride talking, like Arya could just very easily walk away from these people, but she's choosing to stand and maybe make a point. Or maybe, like Yoren was talking about in her first chapter, taking out some of her anger and her sadness on others. As Arya neared, Biter lunged at her, but his chains stopped him just short of grabbing her, and he hissed again, teeth bared. And, again, Arya is putting herself in quite a dangerous position for almost no reason. Like, there's no real gain to any of this, but I guess she's proving a point. Arya then struck Biter hard between the eyes with her wooden sword, causing him to scream and pull violently against his chains. Biter strained so hard that the wagon creaked under the pressure, but his chains held and he eventually collapsed, blood oozing from his sores. Jack and Hagar observed that Arya had more courage than sense. And this just seems like Jaqen is kind of realizing, this person that Arya is pretending to be might be somebody of great interest for Jaqen. Already, Arya is having to play and use a disguise, but she's also showing that she's very brave, all things that Jaqen would have picked up on by now. And Arya then backed away from the wagon and bumped into Gendry, who warned her that Yoren had told them to not go near the prisoners. Because, obviously, these guys are just not great people. Why would you want to go near them? They will obviously just try to murder you. But Arya insisted she wasn't afraid of them, but Gendry admitted he was scared and suggested they get away from the prisoners, to which Arya reluctantly agreed. So it kind of just proves the idea that it's Arya's pride. It's Arya just being prideful and not wanting to show that she is scared of them. Roge's mocking laughter and Biter's hissing followed them as they walked away. Frustrated and wanting to kind of just get some anger out, she decides that she wants to try and ask Gendry if he wants to fight, or I guess play fight or spar more or less. But Gendry notes that he was strong and could hurt her, but Arya confidently replied that she was quick. It's the age-old pairing. You have the quick versus the strong. Who's going to win? In Arya's case, I don't know. Gendry's a lot older than her. I don't really think Arya is the winning side on this one. But they both drew their swords. Gendry wielding Praed's old longsword, not greatly made, and Arya drawing needle, boasting that her steel was better. Of course it was. Arya's a rich kid and Gendry's pretty poor. There's a equipment difference. That's all I'm gonna say. But just before they could start, Gendry noticed something alarming and pointed it out. Gold cloaks were approaching the inn. And why would gold cloaks be approaching the inn? Remember, we've talked about it already. They are days out from King's Landing. What could be so desperate enough that the gold cloaks are coming all the way out to this inn? And that's what has to be going on in Arya's mind, right? Like, there only really is one explanation, that they are here for someone or something. And she is somebody that would be a public enemy number one for the gold cloaks. And so Arya instantly goes into defense mode. They're here for me. They were all in black ringmail, with one officer wearing a decorated black breastplate. But that'll get us into page 67, where we see Yoren confront them. All right, so getting into page 67, we see Arya again using her lessons from Syrio, observing the gold cloaks' horses, noticing that they had been ridden very hard. Again, it makes sense given that Arya and her party, they've had a couple days head start of leaving King's Landing, and so now these gold cloaks have a lot to catch up, and so they've been probably riding pretty hard, probably quite tired. But it also is something to show that, like, if there was a fight or if they needed to try and outrun them, they would be quite fatigued. But she pulls Gendry behind a ledge, whispering quiet as a shadow to keep them hidden as the gold cloaks appear, because instantly, Arya is thinking in her mind, these gold cloaks are here for her, right? She is the one of true value. None of these other people are just, low criminals or low birth or all those things. And that is actually not the case for once. The gold cloaks addressed some of Yoren's recruits outside of the bathhouse, asking if they were taking the black, and joked about joining them at the wall. The officer revealed that he had a warrant for a certain boy, prompting Yoren to come out of the inn to confront them. Now, this is interesting right away. If Arya was, paying attention a bit more or thinking about it, if they were after her, why would they be saying they're here for a boy? Right now, Arya is pretending to be a boy, so it makes sense. But if the gold cloaks were truly after Arya, they would say they're looking for a girl, right? That seems to make the most sense. That should be her first warning sign that they're not actually looking for her, and not to draw attention to herself just in general. Arya whispers to Gendry, knowing that the gold cloaks wanted her, urging him to be quiet. The officer explained that the queen wanted the boy, handing Yoren the warrant sealed with the queen's ribbon and golden wax. And Yoren dismisses the warrant, right? The boy is in the Night's Watch now. That is, by all the law, the correct thing, right? He is now forfeit to the Night's Watch. But again, like we talk about so much, right? The law only matters as much as you can basically enforce it, right? And so if the Gold Cloaks can enforce it, if they had maybe more numbers, they'd be able to aptly enforce their will, even if it isn't the true lawful thing. Think about the Targaryens. When they had their dragons, they were able to basically enforce anything that they wanted, right? They could, take precedent over the faith, for instance, right? You see that with like Maegor, with like Aegon the Conqueror. He did that basically. So again, it's how do you enforce the law? That's really where the power is. The officer, though, is uninterested in Yoren's argument, insisting on taking the boy. And Arya considered running, but felt exhausted by always fleeing. She thought if she were a real water dancer, she would face the men with Needle. And you got to think about Arya. She's run from the capital. She's run from, her father's death. She ran when Ned was getting arrested and all the Stark household was getting attacked. She is tired of running. She wants to at least stand her ground if this is going to be the time when they capture her. But Yoren stands firm, insisting the law was on his side. But the officer drew his sword, saying that it was the only law he needed. Just like what I just talked about, right? The idea that, the law protects you, again, similar to like Ned with Cersei, the law only protects you if you have the power to enforce it, like this officer is trying to do with Yoren. But Yoren remained defiant, showing that he had a sword as well. And even though the officer had 5 men with him, Yoren stood firm, spitting and boasting that he had 30 men to back him up. And that'll get us into page 68. But also, guys, sorry for having the wrong page number. I had to re-record this last section because the audio I pressed it and it didn't actually go. So just if you're wondering why the page number was wrong on the last page, that's why. But with that being said, Yoren is able to also show that he has the numbers, right? And numbers usually beat, not having numbers, right? And so even though Yoren's recruits might be, very untested in battle, they might be using, worse equipment, there's still 30 of them. That's 5 people per gold cloak. It's just going to be overwhelming. But a gold cloak with a broken nose laughed at the challenge, asking who could fight first. And a number of people, jump up to this challenge. Tarber, Cutjack, Kurz, Koss, and Rayson each step forward armed with makeshift weapons like pitchforks, hammers, knives, and a bow. And think about it like this. One person with a bow is detrimental to the gold cloaks because they're going to start rushed by all these different people. Somebody with a bow can just step back and just start picking them off while they're distracted. Even Dauber, still naked from the bathhouse, grabbed a dagger, asking if it was a fight. Hot Pie even joined in, scrambling for a rock, even surprising Arya. Because Arya's thinking, why are these people all fighting for me? And especially Hot Pie, somebody that, she beat up in the last chapter. Why are they fighting for her? And Arya's just not realizing they're not really fighting for her. They don't know who they're fighting for at all right now. And also the other part of it is it's more about pride and not being to be pushed around by the gold cloaks. And something I should mention as well is a lot of these people are going to be from rough areas of town. They're going to be more involved with like having like street brawls or whatever. These aren't like people that have never gotten in like scuffles and stuff like that. These are people that have played dirty and have grown up maybe, in the poorer parts of King's Landing. But the gold cloaks mocked them with broken nose, belittling their lack of fighting skill. Arya, who is determined not to hide any longer, will not let anyone die for her, emerging from the hedge in a water dance's stance, brandishing Needle. And the officer just straight up dismisses Arya. And something I find interesting is they actually straight up call her, a little girl. Is that because they realize that she is a little girl, mocking her as if Arya was a boy? Something you do not want to be called as a little girl in terms of like your fighting skill or whatever. It's just something that they would maybe throw out there. Interesting to think about maybe which one is actually correct here. But Arya takes this pretty poorly, as she says, she isn't a girl, and she is the one that they're after. Which, Arya, you really got to take it, Yoren's advice. Do not bring attention to you. You are someone that if it got revealed, everybody and their mother would sell you out. But however, though, the officer kind of discounts her and says they're here for Gendry. And they point a sword at him specifically. And now this is going to bring up a lot of interesting points. Why do the gold cloaks want Gendry? What is Gendry's relevance here? And even Gendry himself later on is going to know, like, he doesn't know why they're after him. But bad things tend to happen to people around him. But Yoren acts swiftly. With this distraction, he presses his sword to the officer's throat and threatens him. Yoren claimed that there were more brothers in the inn and wanted them to leave. And something else I think that's interesting to note, if you're in Yoren's situation, would you just kill the gold cloaks? Because if you think about it, the gold cloaks, if you let them go, they're going to go tell, they're going to go tell others. They're going to have more men and they're going to come hunt you down with higher numbers. So this would be your best chance to actually take them out from, purporting any message, because them, not showing up, right, with this Gendry boy, or them not showing up to, their higher ups, could be a number of things. Maybe they're caught up in the war. Maybe they get killed by this wolf pack that we hear about in this chapter. A number of explanations can be used that instead of just Yoren and his party killed them. But it's also, morally, do you want to kill people, all that stuff? Like, it's a interesting question that Yoren finds himself to be in right now. But the officer dropped his sword, which Yoren took, remarking that good steel was needed at the wall. The officer was defeated for now, but wouldn't be forever, as he warns Yoren that the next time they met, he'd take his head along with the bastard boys. And again, this implies something else. Gendry is a bastard, and that seems to be key to these gold cloaks. Well, who are his parents? What is the relevance? Why is Gendry such a target? What did he do that makes him such a target? Yoren dismisses the threat, sending the officer and his men off down the King's Road. And this gets us into the last page of the chapter, but Hot Pie himself seems like this is a victory. This is not really a victory, as Yoren is going to tell him, right? Don't be foolish. They're going to come back in with larger numbers. They are now going to be forced to ride through the night to stay ahead of their pursuers. It's not great. They've put a target on their back. But Yoren picks up a short sword dropped by an officer and offers it to Hot Pie, who eagerly accepts it. Yoren does caution Hot Pie, don't use it on Arya, or Ari. But I will say, maybe giving a good castle-forged sword to Hot Pie, the one who's probably the most useless with it in his hands, probably was not the best decision from Yoren, I'm just saying, but, continuing on. But Yoren then addresses Gendry, saying the queen wants him bad. And Arya's confused. Why would the queen want Gendry? But it's even more interesting when you think about it, like, why would anybody want you, Arya? You're just some orphan boy that's, really poor. Like, that's basically what Gendry tells her. And you think about Gendry and his, background, right? He's somebody growing up with basically no parents, and, he finally has some, and then he has some interest from people like Jon Arryn and Ned Stark, but then both those people die very quickly afterwards. Gendry knows there's something weird going on revolving himself, but he doesn't know exactly what that means. And Arya insults Gendry back and questions his true name, which Gendry doesn't really know who his true parent, is, or at least his father anyway. Yoren expresses disbelief that anyone would want either Arya or Gendry, but asserts they are not to be captured. Again, Yoren doesn't really know what Gendry is, right? Or who he is, because Gendry was, sent to Yoren basically by somebody probably paid by Yoren or by Varys, and so he doesn't really understand why anybody would want Gendry, but he knows that he is the target. But he does instruct them that they are to ride with the two coursers and escape towards the wall at the first sight of danger, aka the Gold Cloaks, because they are the two that the Gold Cloaks might want, and that might drive some of the Gold Cloaks to them, away from them. But at the same time, they are kind of very valuable as well, being Arya's a Stark and Gendry, he doesn't know it yet, is a Baratheon, but is a bastard. But Arya reminds Yoren that a man also threatened him, indicating that he is not safe either. But Yoren responds quite coolly to this, suggesting that if the man can take his head, he is welcome to try. And that finishes us off for Arya 2, A Clash of Kings. Pretty, shorter chapter, very comparable to last week's with Bran. Also, thank you guys for seeming like you had a lot of interest in the last chapter, which I was very surprised about, because Bran chapters didn't do very good for the first book of the series with the Game of Thrones, but you guys seem to enjoy Bran, so hopefully that continues, I guess. Also, at the very end of this, if you did enjoy the video, consider subscribing and liking. And also, shout out to my Spotify listeners. If you did want to become one, again, the link is in the description. If you did want to listen to these each week at the same time, Tuesday at 7 p.m. U.S. Central Time. So, hope you guys all enjoyed, and I'll see you guys all in the next video where we'll be doing John 1.